Hey everyone, welcome back to the Intelligence Report. I am your host, Dylan Welch. I'm very excited about our guest today. So, if you listen to our last podcast episode, I talked to a global leader who talks about the importance of in person connections. Now, this wasn't planned, but this leads right into the conversation I'm excited to have today because I always like to share a little bit about how I met my guest. So, I spoke at an event last year called EarthX. I met Jason there, and Jason and I just kind of hit it off. He's a great guy. He's doing some really cool things. And not only was he doing some really cool things when we met, which I was really excited to learn more about, he has some really big goals that he's continuously working towards. I'm excited to learn more about them and share them with you today. So today, I'm excited to have Jason Seedall, the director of the Roosevelt Initiative, on the podcast. Jason, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So let's go a little bit into your background and the background of the Roosevelt Initiative. So how did you kind of get into this space of policy of conservation?
Yeah, so how I got into what I'm doing now is a little bit by accident. So when I was still doing school at Utah State University, I met my wife and she still had a year left of her schooling. So I decided to pursue my master's of business administration, which followed very well with the fact that I studied international business. So I expected I was going to go into some kind of international sales role or some kind of business development position just with a bigger company after I graduated. But I took on a job while I was doing my master's as an executive assistant with a group called the Center for Growth and Opportunity, who have now rebranded as a group called the Abundance Institute. And they were a libertarian think tank, and they exposed me to the broader world of policy and everything in DC and how you can advocate and create an impact without actually being an elected representative or being in DC all the time. And I really kind of fell in love with it. I've always wanted to be involved in politics in some capacity. I've always been a news junkie, always wondering what's happening in the world, and wanted to be able to make an impact. So I started working with them, but after I graduated and my wife and I moved, I started working with a group called the Ukraine Future Business Council, which was a nonprofit 501c4 based in DC by some American Ukrainian businessmen who wanted to promote policy between some diplomatic conversations between the United States and Ukraine. And I really love that position, but I was only with them a little bit. I think they've toned down a little of what they're doing now. But I wanted to stay in it so badly, even though I didn't have an opening or a job offer from anyone in that space, but I really wanted to keep working in DC. So myself and some colleagues set up the Roosevelt Initiative, and we decided, with Theodore Roosevelt being a personal hero of mine, as well as everybody else, that maybe what the modern political world needed is a little more TR. So we decided to set up the Roosevelt Initiative as a 501c4 nonprofit. And what it does is it lobbies for policy that channels the legacy of Theodore Roosevelt in the areas of natural resources, foreign affairs, and fair commerce. Most of what I handle is the natural resources area. I grew up in southern Idaho. I went to school in northern Utah. And because of that, I've spent a lot of time in the outdoors around Idaho, Utah, Montana, Wyoming. And it just feels really good to be able to do some work that protects the places that I spent so much time with and also prepare for a future that I hope our kids can enjoy.
Amazing. Well, man, that's a lot to unpack right there. That's a super cool story. No, don't feel sorry. I love kind of hearing that growth. Talk about a really interesting education, international business and Chinese. Like I'm sure you saw, where kind of the world is heading. You got your master's, and that's what's interesting about this show and myself is, we're passionate about very similar things. Teddy Roosevelt is a huge hero of mine. I'm sure you hear that every time you talk about what you're doing. But conservation is important. And I've learned just through interviews like this, through business, through policy people, through finance people, change has to come from the top. Like education is very important. Media is very important. The average person has to make a lot of changes, but true, huge, scalable impact, in my opinion, has to come from policymakers. And so for you to see that so quickly in your career and pursue it with passion is amazing to hear about. So congrats on that. I can tell you're passionate about it. I can tell, when we met, I think that's what drew me to continue our conversation and to continue hanging out with you and be friends with you, is just your passion lit up when I could hear what you're working on. So tell us a little bit more about the Roosevelt Initiative. What are some wins and what are kind of your goals as you continue to expand it? And so I'll start with this question. Can you share a story that kind of comes to mind where, you were working on something and you got to kind of see it through and you got to witness, this change of policy, or these people embrace it, or actual impact happen?
My favorite part about this story is that it's still happening as we're talking. So that's why I really want to share it, is that about a year and a half ago, during appropriation season in DC, which is where all of the budget talk happens, there was a lot of talk about shrinking the national parks budget. So this was in 2024. And I thought, I really don't want to see that happen. Really, of course, don't want to see that. I grew up an hour and a half from Yellowstone National Park. So many of the people we work with have such fond memories of national parks that we thought, we can't let that happen. So we go up in both 2024 in December and then in 2025 throughout the entire spring, and shared that we want to see the national parks budget either increase or at least stay the same. We don't want to see cuts. And my favorite part of that process was how much agreement there was, no matter who I spoke to, across the aisle. Republican senators, Democratic Congress people, no matter what, everyone said, no, we agree. We don't want to see the parks shrink. We don't want to see them hurt. But people asked me a question I wasn't quite prepared for, and that was, but what else? Money is one thing. A lot of people are going to say they have a perfect budget, they don't need more, or maybe we can make it smaller, but we need to shrink it in some places, grow it in others. Budget is such a dirty conversation all the time, right? So they said, what you're going to have to do as an outsider to all of this, you're not a congressperson, you're not a staffer, is you're going to have to find more creative ways. So what else can we do to support the parks besides money? And so I said, that's a great question. Let me get back to you on that. So we met with some other people, some representatives who are very close to the parks, people who've worked in the parks, things like that, and said, what can we do to help besides that? And a lot of what was discussed was that the national parks need a little more liberty to make some of their own decisions, be able to know what maintenance they can choose. They need more authority on their hiring process, things like that. So we collected that and put it into a short bill that we have actually taken up to the Hill this year, gotten feedback on it from people up there, and put a new version out. And now that appropriation season for 26 is ending, we have multiple offices that are taking a look at it and are preparing to see whether they can incorporate it into a larger text or take it as its own. But there's been a lot of bipartisan acceptance of what we've put forward. So I can't say it's a win yet. I hope it will be soon, but that's one of my favorite parts because it's been a 2-year process. It's involved a lot of back and forth, and it still feels like a win though, because every time we talk to someone, they love what's being said, they want to learn more, and there's new opportunities for growth for not only, of course, our organization, but the country as a whole.
That is a huge win, and it's interesting. It's tough having patience like that sometimes, right? 2 years working on something is tough to go through, I imagine, but at the same time, that can have impact that lasts hundreds and hundreds of years, that can, give thousands, if not millions of people, an amazing opportunity to get outdoors and experience the beauty that America has to offer. So I love starting with a question like that because I can tell you're passionate about it. It gives an example of what you're doing at the Roosevelt Initiative. But share a little bit more higher level, what you're working on at the Roosevelt Initiative and what your goals are with the organization.
What we always tell people is that our goal is to promote policy that channels the legacy of Theodore Roosevelt. So Theodore Roosevelt is obviously one of the most popular presidents. There are multiple organizations named after him and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So we're not trying to do anything to upend what other people are working on. We want to just supplement what other people are working on while also promoting what we think is great. We try not to do something that we would say TR would want this, because maybe he doesn't. But what we want to do is take the lessons that he put forward during his life and try to put them into modern policy, because we believe if there is a time in history that most closely mirrors ours in patterns and sympathies, it's most likely Theodore Roosevelt's. I mean, a lot of massive technological change that is changing the way that consumers and workers operate. Massive changes to how we're viewing conservation, a deepening energy crisis, and a lot of issues like that, and a global issue of what superpowers are truly doing, and a massive shift in the balance of power across the world. That was very much what Theodore Roosevelt came into the presidency with around the turn of the century. And so because of that, we think he was able to guide us so well then that maybe lessons he was able to provide during his administration could guide us now just as well. So we want to promote policy in the areas we think he most deeply touched during his administration, which is natural resources, obviously through his conservation and his energy mindset, but also through so many other avenues. But additionally, his foreign affairs leadership of trying to make sure that America is prepared, it can handle itself, but it isn't the first person to throw a punch, but that it is something to be respected as a global superpower. And lastly, in fair commerce, with what he promoted in both of his election cycles as a square deal. Everyone getting a fair chance, consumers and workers being protected, but businesses allowed to thrive and grow the way that they're supposed to. Because of so many questions that are so similar during his time and ours, we just try to promote all of those things at once, which is a lot to tackle, but it's been such a fun challenge and something that we're very, very passionate about.
Very eloquently put, well spoken, and it is crazy to think, say Roosevelt was president roughly 100 years ago, give or take. To some people that seems like a long time ago. We've gone through a lot as a country since then, multiple wars, a lot of changes, a lot of, crises. But at the same time, 100 years isn't that long in the grand scheme of, kind of humanity, the universe. And it is really crazy how it is cyclical and how many similarities there are to what he was passionate about in terms of his policy and what's happening right now. Talk about his passion for natural resources. There's obviously a huge conversation around climate change. Fair commerce. There's a lot of talk around, tech oligarchies and power consolidation and wealth inequality. And foreign affairs, what's happening right now. Whenever you're listening to this, maybe there's something, but yeah, it's America, being strong, but being able to protect others and not, be kind of the aggressor, which is a huge talking point, literally today as we record this podcast. So it's so fascinating how it is so cyclical and how history can repeat itself. But what I love about this, you hear history repeats itself pretty often when we're talking about these things, oftentimes in bad ways. So it makes me excited to hear we're talking about history repeating itself, but people doing things for positive causes. Tell us a little bit about, I'm somewhat familiar. I'm sure you're a lot more, of an expert on Roosevelt himself. So what was it about, our president that drew you to, his interests, his personality, his policies, his hobbies, for you to dedicate, so much of your time, your career, to furthering his policy? Like, what drew you to him? And tell us a little bit about him for our audience members that aren't as familiar with who he was as a person.
The reason I love TR so much is very well put in a quote from Edward O'Keefe, who is the CEO of the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library, which opens this summer. I'm very excited about all of that. But Edward O'Keefe is a historian of TR, and he said, Theodore Roosevelt is like a Rorschach test. Whatever you see in him probably reflects more about you than it does about him. And I think there are a lot of historical figures that is the case, but most of the time they are a character who has a very magnetic and powerful and persistent personality. It's pretty easy to look at a lot of modern contemporary presidents and say what we think they would have wanted, or to replicate what they would want. But I don't think there's a president that you can look at and everyone can find something to love about the way that there is about TR. I've seen people describe, when I speak to people about different political affiliations about him, it's amazing the things they remember him for, and every one of them makes me fall in love with him and his work a little bit more. Like I said, grew up doing a lot of outdoors stuff, so his hunting and his conservation, his interest in biology, which, fun fact, is actually what he planned to study and do after he graduated from Harvard. He wanted to be a biologist. So his love for the outdoors and nature is very present for me. He had a very powerful streak of standing up for the little guy despite coming from a very established power. He came from a wealthy family in New York. He was often at ends with a lot of his family members who were on the wealthier side, wanted more conservative policies, and he would push progressive ideas, and they would write him letters saying, "What are you doing? You're embarrassing the family." And yet he has gone down as one of the most famous American presidents, and in my opinion, the quintessential American president, because whenever I am in DC and I hear people ask about TR and I tell them what we do, depending on their political affiliation, they have something else to love about him. When I talk to more liberal-minded environmentalists, they say, "Oh, Theodore Roosevelt, the conservationist, the national parks guy." And I say, "Yeah, you're right." When I talk to people who maybe have a bit of a libertarian streak, they say, "Oh, the trust buster, the anti-monopoly guy." And I say, "Absolutely." And it just goes from there, and I love that because there's something so unifying about his legacy. So I have fallen in love with him because he was an absolute maverick. He knew what was right. I think he had a very good habit of balancing progressivism with conservatism, and not necessarily the way that a lot of people think of conservatism, but he was a very morally stand-up guy. He deplored swearing. He dressed appropriately for every situation he went to. He was incredibly respectful to women and children all the time. He took time and breaks out of his life to be a family man. If I'm correct, every 6 o'clock of the day when he was in town, he would always stop whatever he was doing, no matter if he was mid-meeting, if it was incredibly crucial, a world leader, and he would stop and say, "I need to go be with my kids." And then he would resume after the time he had scheduled with his kids. So he's a very traditional guy in that sense, but he fought for everything he cared about in so many ways. And that's something I wish I could see more, and more people do. And it's something that I would love to have more people in, elected positions of power in government and in the private sector as well emulate. So that's what really drew me to him, is how, like I said, you can love everything about him, or you can find something to love about him, no matter who you are.
You bring up so many good points, interesting points. One thing that stood out to me was how you can talk to someone on either side of the political spectrum and they can find something they like about him. I think that's very rare these days. You kind of have to be that sort of divisive politician to make it to that level of power, which is extremely unfortunate, but that's, what gets attention. It's what gets money. It's what gets support. And, I saw this test where it was like, if you're a Republican, say something nice about a Democrat. And if you're a Democrat, say something nice about a Republican. And it's so easy to be like, on whatever side you are, oh, blame them for this. They do this wrong. They're screwing this up. Both sides can go both ways. But I like seeing that because it was like, you can take the most extreme person and it flips a switch where they can say, okay, like, well, at least they're doing this, which is, I respect. And that is really interesting as just a politician as a whole, where you don't have to say, hey, if you're a Democrat, find something nice about Donald Trump. Or if you're a Republican, vice versa. It's like everyone can kind of find something nice to say, which says a lot about who he is as a person and his policies. And we really need that back in America today. So it's awesome that you're working on this. It's awesome that you're so passionate about it. a couple other fun facts I love. One, he had really bad asthma as a kid, and he literally powered through it through just rigorous exercise and boxing. Two, after his presidency, this is one of the craziest things I think I've ever heard. He did this 6-month expedition into the Amazon rainforest. And this wasn't like, hold handing a tour. They literally carried everything they had through the jungle, went off the grid for 6 months, and barely made it out alive. Now imagine a president doing that today. Like imagine Joe Biden, and I'm not saying anything about Joe Biden, but like, new president comes in, old president just goes off the grid to explore the jungle for 6 months. Like at an elderly age. It's so cool, so interesting. And it just, as you kind of mentioned, like he has so many different dynamics about him, which I think is really powerful as a person. That's what I really enjoy when I meet people is we live in a time where you kind of get pigeonholed into this is my job, which is my identity. And I think it's important to pursue multiple hobbies and try new things. It explores, it opens up perspectives, whether you're learning a new language or, you're trying a new sport or you're going out and, experiencing nature. And I will say this is what I thought was really cool about you. And this is a fun fact for those of us listening. And I don't know if Jason wants me to share this or not, but I'm going to anyway. Jason texted me this weekend and just said, hey, I really want to get into boxing. Like, do you have any tips for me? And that just made me so excited because I love people. Clearly, you're doing amazing things in your career. You're ambitious, you're smart, you're well educated. But to ask about that and in a very humble way of like, hey, any tips, any advice, how do I get started is just something that I really admire and respect. So I see a lot of similarities, in you, in TR, which is just great. I think like from the top, I've always enjoyed chatting with you and that just like solidified it. So anyway, tell us a little bit more about kind of the future and what you're working on and where you want to continue taking the Roosevelt Initiative.
Well, first off, that was incredibly kind. Thank you. I really appreciate what you had to say there. And I agree, same thing to you. I remember seeing all of the different things that you were pursuing over the last however many months or years we've known each other, and seeing what you do, it's just super exciting. I love seeing that people are out and moving, and that's another one of the things that drew me to Theodore Roosevelt. If you have a chance to read any of his biographies, I highly recommend it because you'll find out that he just didn't really stop. Ever. He was always doing something. He used to hold cabinet meetings during tennis matches on the White House lawn because he said, if you want to talk to me, you'll have to come do it during tennis. So he would always be doing things he cared about, and I love that. So that's something I hope a lot of people take from him, and also the work we're doing is to better yourself, because a nation filled with better people will be a better nation. And so if you're always improving yourself, then your country will become better as well. As for the future of the Roosevelt Initiative, I'm really excited that you asked that. We're going to continue to grow. We're going to continue to take more policies up the hill in D.C. and try to promote things that we hope channel the legacy of Theodore Roosevelt. Recently, we've been working on a geothermal energy bill that would allow for some more financing to be available to geothermal projects from the Department of Energy. Very excited about that, especially with how much energy is becoming a very potent and very excitable topic. We're excited to be a part of that conversation. But more than that, we are ready to include more people in what it is that we are doing. So as a 501c4, we are allowed to lobby, we are allowed to have people involved, but it's a little harder to grow what it is that we're doing and bring more and more Americans and citizens into the policy space. So we're very excited that later this month we're going to be launching a new partner organization that is going to run parallel to what it is we're doing, called the Roosevelt Alliance. It's going to be a 501c3. It's going to be a membership structure that allows for the average American who wants to contribute to our work, to contribute to putting more TR into the modern political sphere, allow them to do that and support what it is that we're doing. So I'm very excited about that. It's still going to pursue the same things we've talked about, particularly natural resources and fair commerce. It's going to be all about bringing citizens together, increasing civic engagement, creating new and abundant opportunities for those citizens, while also doing all of it in the name of Theodore Roosevelt and putting more TR into the world. So that's what's next. I'm very excited. We're going to be launching that at our summit at EarthX, which is where you and I met last year. That's on April 20th, coming up later this month. So I'm very excited about it. And everyone will be able to see more of what we're doing and be involved.
Depending on when you're listening to this, if you listen to it the day it drops, that will be pre-EarthX. So if you're in the Dallas area or you want to attend, we're going to drop the link in the podcast description so you can register there. But if you listen to this a year, 2 years, 3 years down the line from when we publish this, you still have ways to get involved. And I always like to wrap up our podcast with, how can the average person, the average listener, do something that can leave a positive impact on their lives and on their planet. And, every guest has a slightly different response. Sometimes it's, go out and pick up some litter, or sometimes it's invest in our company. But I realistically, genuinely mean this. I think if you're an average listener and you care about the things we've discussed today, which hopefully you do, land and nature conservation, protecting, consumers, supporting capitalism and businesses for growth, strengthening America without, being overly aggressive, all extremely important things, all things that represent, who I think America is at its very core. Jason has been working very hard to create a way for us to get involved, which is really cool with the Roosevelt Alliance. So what we'll do is we will drop the link to the Roosevelt Initiative in the podcast episode. And then once information is officially available to get involved with the Roosevelt Alliance, we will update the description of the podcast with the link for that as well. So please go out and support, learn, educate yourself. We could chat about this all day, but I know Jason's a busy guy doing cool things. And talk about growth. Jason and I met at EarthX about a year ago, and now he's running an event, his own summit in EarthX, which is pretty amazing. So love to see, year over year growth. You compound that over years and years. Can't wait, to see the positive impact that you will have on a lot of individual people and on the country as a whole. So, Jason, we're coming up on our time here. I just want to say thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciated it.
And to all of our supporters, our listeners, I think Jason truly is the epitome of the guest we try to bring on, people who have an interest in a lot of different things. They're successful in their own right, and they're actively working on making the world a better place, which is what this show is all about. So I want to thank you for supporting us, and we'll see you on the next episode of The Intelligence Report. Thank you.